The first time Texas heard his name, it was spoken wrong, twisted by fear and whiskey. Some said he was tall as a fence post. Others swore he was still just a boy, but everyone agreed on one thing: when he rode into a town, the air changed. Dogs went silent. Men loosened their holsters without knowing why. In the summer of 1873, the Old West was already a graveyard of broken promises, yet he moved through it like something the dirt itself had made, born of dust, blood, and unfinished prayers. The night he ran, the sky looked wounded, streaked with red, as if the sun had been cut open and left to bleed itself dry behind the fields. He had waited for that color his whole life without knowing it, memorizing the way the overseer's boots sounded on dirt, counting breaths between the crack of the whip and the scream that followed. When the moment came, it did not feel brave or heroic. It felt quiet. Too quiet. The other boys slept in a row like discarded tools, their chests rising and falling in exhausted surrender, and for a moment, he hated himself for leaving them behind, hated the way freedom asked for a price before it ever showed its face. He slid out from the shed with bare feet, sinking into warm mud. Every step a gamble. Every shadow a threat that seemed to breathe. The dogs were the worst part. Not their teeth, not even their growls, but the way they knew him. He had fed them scraps as a child, whispered to them when no one watched, and now they lifted their heads as he passed, eyes following him with something like confusion. He did not run at first. He walked, steady and slow, because panic was loud and he had learned that loud things died fast. His secret burned against his ribs, heavier than hunger, heavier than fear. He knew how to make pain stop. He had learned it watching men hurt each other for sport, listening to drunken confessions, seeing where fists landed and where blades finished the job. He had never used that knowledge before, but he carried it with him now like a hidden knife. When the shouting started, he was already in the trees, branches tearing at his skin as if the land itself wanted a piece of him. A shot rang out behind him, then another, and he understood something then that would never leave him. Fear could be shaped. It could be turned, sharpened, sent back the way it came. He doubled back once, silent as smoke, and when a man stumbled into his path, drunk on anger and certainty, the boy did not scream or hesitate. He struck where breath lived, where balance lied, and left the man folded in the dirt, choking on his own surprise. By dawn, the fields were gone, replaced by open land and the long, empty promise of the West. And the boy walked into it alone, carrying a freedom that already tasted like blood and a secret that would one day teach grown men to lower their eyes when he entered a room the Old West did not welcome him with open arms or easy mercy. It watched him first, measuring him the way predators measure weakness, the way towns measure strangers by the weight of their silence. He drifted from place to place, sleeping under wagons, in dry river beds, behind saloons where the smell of rot and whiskey mixed into something honest. Hunger followed him like a second shadow, but he learned quickly that hunger could be bargained with. He learned which men talked too much, which ones flinched when challenged, which hands shook before they reached for a gun. Survival became a language, and he spoke it fluently without ever realizing when it had replaced innocence. The man who found him was not kind, but he was observant, and in the West that passed for something close to mercy. He owned a scarred horse, a pair of worn revolvers, and a reputation that made other men step aside, rather than test their luck. He did not ask the boy's name. He asked how fast he could run and whether he understood the difference between noise and fear. When the boy answered wrong, the man knocked him flat with the back of his hand, then helped him up and told him the lesson was free this time. From then on, teaching became punishment, and punishment became instruction. He learned that a gun was not power by itself. Power lived in the pause before the draw, in the way a man held eye contact, just a second too long, in the stories told ahead of you, so you never had to tell them yourself. The mentor showed him how to walk into a room already feared, how to let silence do the work of 10 bullets, how to leave someone alive just so the truth would travel faster than any corpse. They practiced at dawn and dusk, firing at bottles, coins, shadows cast against canyon walls, until the boy's hands stopped shaking and his eyes stopped wandering. But the hardest lessons were not about killing. They were about choosing when not to. The mentor taught him that mercy, used carelessly, was just another kind of weakness, and weakness was a debt the West always collected with interest. He taught him to read the land, to sense when a town was ready to explode, when a man was already dead and just hadn't accepted it yet. Slowly, the boy understood that fear was not something to flee from. It was something to ride ahead of him, announcing his arrival, clearing his path, turning a nameless runaway into a rumor that men argued over and prayed was not true. The massacre did not begin with shouting or gunfire, and that was why it unsettled the survivors so deeply. It began with a town holding its breath. The place was little more than a crossroads with a saloon nailed together from warped boards, a dry well, and men who believed numbers made them safe. He rode in at dusk, dust clinging to his coat, eyes low, movements unhurried, and something in the way he dismounted made conversation thin out and die. No one challenged him at first. They watched. They waited. Fear crept in quietly, the way a fever does, unnoticed until it was already too late to stop it. The men who decided to test him were already angry before they ever saw his face. Drink had loosened their sense and tightened their pride, and pride was the West's favorite excuse for blood. They cornered him behind the saloon, 6 of them, boots scraping dirt, hands hovering close to iron. Witnesses would later argue about who drew first, but every version agreed on how fast it ended. There was no panic in his movements, no wasted motion. One shot dropped a man before his mouth finished forming a threat. Another spun someone sideways into the wall, surprise frozen across his features. By the time the echoes faded, the alley was choked with smoke and disbelief. What followed was worse than the killing itself. He did not flee. He walked back into the street and stood there, revolver hanging loose at his side, daring the town to finish what its men had started. Someone fired from a window. He answered without looking, and the body fell out into the dirt like a broken thing tossed aside. After that, no one shot again. They watched as he moved through them, not hunting, not raging, but ending resistance wherever it appeared, as methodical as a storm rolling across flat land. By morning, 7 men were dead, 2 wounded beyond saving, and the town felt emptied out, as if something essential had been taken with the bodies. He was gone before the sun fully rose, leaving behind bloodstains, shattered confidence, and a story that grew teeth as it traveled. Some said he killed a dozen men. Others swore bullets could not touch him. The truth settled somewhere between, but it no longer mattered. From that day on, his name stopped sounding like a rumor and started sounding like a warning whispered too late, carried from mouth to mouth by men who had seen what happened when fear finally decided to fight back after the massacre. Texas itself seemed to tighten around him. Towns he had never seen learned his face from frightened descriptions, and lawmen who had never met him swore personal oaths to be the one who ended his ride. Pauses formed with too much confidence and not enough understanding, men bolstered by badges, bounties, and the comforting belief that order always outlasted chaos. They followed tracks across scorched plains and into broken hills, convinced the land would betray him if they pushed hard enough. Instead, The land swallowed them whole, stretching wide and indifferent, offering silence where they expected answers. He learned quickly that pursuit changed men. It made them careless. It made them loud. A sheriff chased him into a canyon once, certain the narrow walls would corner him. By dusk, the canyon echoed with gunfire, and by nightfall the sheriff's horse wandered back alone, reins dragging like a question no one wanted to ask. Bounty hunters fared no better. They came in pairs and trios, boasting of rewards and reputations, but they underestimated how well he listened. He knew when rocks had been disturbed, when birds rose too suddenly, when a campfire burned too low for comfort. The land spoke to him, and he answered with patience. Rumors spread that the desert favored him, that storms rose when he needed cover and faded when his enemies lay bleeding in the dust. Men claimed they saw him vanish into heat shimmer, reappear miles away without leaving tracks, walk unscathed through ambushes that should have torn him apart. Each failure fed the legend, turning pursuit into something closer to dread. Lawmen began to hesitate, to question orders, to glance at the horizon, as if expecting judgment to ride in from it. Yet the hunt never truly stopped. It pressed in slowly, like a tightening noose, reminding him that the West was vast, but not endless. Every victory added weight to his name and narrowed his choices. He could no longer pass unnoticed, could no longer sleep without one eye open. The land that protected him also isolated him, pushing him farther from towns, farther from anything that resembled a life. In the spaces between gunfights and long rides, he felt the cost of being untouchable, the quiet erosion of everything except survival, as Texas closed in with badges, rifles, and a growing fear that the man they chased was becoming something the law could no longer recognize or control. The past found him where he least expected it, not in a town or on a wanted poster, but in a pair of familiar eyes staring back at him from across a campfire. The man was older now, bent by time and dust, but the voice was the same, thick with authority and ownership, calling a name he had buried years ago. Word had traveled faster than he realized, carried by traders and drifters, until it reached someone who remembered, a boy, who ran under a bleeding sky. The reunion was quiet, heavy with things unsaid, and in that silence the distance between who he had been and what he had become collapsed into something suffocating. The man spoke of debts, of losses suffered after the escape, of punishments handed out to those left behind. Each word was a hook dragged through old wounds, pulling memories he had sharpened himself to forget. For the first time in years, the gun at his side felt heavy in the wrong way, less like a tool and more like a question. He realized then that every mile he had ridden, every body left in the dirt, had been part of a long refusal to face this moment. The West had given him space to grow into a legend, but legends still cast shadows, and his shadow pointed straight back to where he started. When violence came, it did not feel new. It felt inevitable. Men loyal to his past moved against him, believing numbers and familiarity would break him. They were wrong. The fight was short, brutal, and personal, ending with smoke drifting over bodies that belonged to a life he had sworn never to return to. Standing there, gun warm in his hand, he understood that survival had cost him the last excuse he had been clinging to. He could no longer claim he was only running, only reacting. Every choice now belonged fully to him. By dawn, he knew he could not keep riding the same circle. Vanishing was still possible, disappearing into Mexico or the territories where his name meant nothing yet. So was staying, leaning fully into the fear he inspired, and becoming a force no one dared challenge. The West offered both paths without judgment. As he saddled his horse, the wind carrying dust across the plain, he felt the weight of the decision settle in his chest, heavy and final, knowing that whatever he chose next would not be about escape, but about what kind of monster or myth he was willing to let survive.